snowstorm battered the small cabin, rattling the wooden walls as if demanding entry. Ethan sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames that cracked and spat, their warmth barely reaching the corners of the room. His fingers traced the rim of his mug, coffee inside, long gone cold. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness lay buried beneath a white void, endless and unforgiving. Solitude had been his choice. Here, the past couldn't haunt him. A sudden, heavy thud against the door shattered the fragile peace. Ethan froze. It wasn't the wind. This was deliberate, solid, alive. He grabbed his rifle, the weight familiar, comforting. Heart racing, he edged toward the door, cracked it open, and met the eyes of a wolf. It was massive, its grey fur clumped with ice and blood. Steam billowed from its nostrils as it panted, eyes gleaming with something that made Ethan hesitate. Desperation, pain, and something older, something ancient, like a fragment of a story whispered through the veins of the earth. The animal staggered, nearly collapsing against the threshold. Instinct told Ethan to shut the door, to let nature take its course, but he didn't. Instead, he lowered the rifle and stepped aside. The wolf dragged itself inside, collapsing near the fire with a low whimper. Ethan locked the door, his heart pounding louder than the storm outside. He kept his distance, watching the creature's chest rise and fall in ragged breaths. Blood pooled beneath it, staining the wooden floor. Gathering his medical kit, he approached slowly. The wolf's ears twitched, but it made no move to attack. Up close, the wound was worse than he thought. A deep gash along its side, likely from a trap or another animal. He cleaned the injury, his fingers surprisingly steady. The wolf flinched but did not resist. Hours passed. The fire dimmed, but the storm raged on. Ethan sat against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. The wolf slept, its breathing steadier now. Against all reason, he felt a strange sense of companionship. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone. Dawn broke, casting a pale light over the frozen landscape. The wolf stirred, eyes meeting Ethan's. Something passed between them. Not quite trust, but an understanding. A silent recognition that they were both exiles, both wandering souls seeking something beyond survival. He opened the door. The wolf didn't move. Days turned into weeks. The wolf recovered, strength returning to its limbs. It watched him from across the room, eyes following his every move. Ethan spoke to it sometimes, feeling absurd, but the silence felt heavier without his voice. Sometimes, as he drifted off to sleep, he imagined the wolf was more than it seemed. A sentinel from the wilderness, a spirit bound to the cold and snow, offering him something that had no name. Then one morning, the wolf was gone. Tracks led into the forest, fading beneath fresh snow. Ethan felt the loss like a punch to his chest. He had known this day would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. He busied himself with chores, pretending the emptiness didn't claw at him, until 3 nights later, when another sound stirred him from sleep, a soft scratching at the door. Ethan opened it, breath catching in his throat. The wolf had returned, but it wasn't alone. 2 pups huddled beside it, their fur damp and matted. The wolf stepped aside, nudging them forward. Ethan knelt, unsure, until the pups pressed against him, trembling. The wolf watched, eyes calm, as if granting him guardianship. Ethan brought them inside, his heart swelling with something he had forgotten, purpose. The wolf lingered at the threshold, watching as the pups curled near the fire. Then, with a final glance, an exchange of something deeper than gratitude, it vanished into the night. Weeks turned into months. The pups grew, their playful energy filling the cabin with life. Ethan taught them the boundaries of their wildness, while they softened his own hardened edges. They were not his pets, they were something more, an extension of the forest itself. Spring arrived, melting the snow and revealing the earth beneath. Pups, now strong and curious, began to linger by the door, their instincts stirred. Ethan knew what was coming. He led them to the edge of the forest, the place where he had first met their mother. He knelt one last time, their warm bodies pressed against him. "Go on," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You know the way." The pups hesitated, then bounded into the trees, disappearing into the wild. Ethan watched until they were gone, silence settling around him. But this time, it felt different, fuller, less empty. He returned to the cabin, the ghost of their presence lingering in every corner. He picked up his camera, capturing the view beyond his window, the wilderness that had given him something he thought he had lost, hope. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself returning to the edge of the forest each morning, eyes scanning the tree line. He knew the wolves were gone, But a part of him hoped that one day he might see them again. He began leaving small offerings at the forest's edge, a piece of dried meat, a fish from the stream. Sometimes the offerings remained untouched, but other times they disappeared. One crisp morning, he found paw prints in the snow, fresh, small. His heart raced. He followed them for a short distance, but they led deeper into the woods, vanishing among the trees. He smiled, feeling the warmth of connection even in their absence. Ethan continued his life in the cabin, but he was no longer the same man who had sought isolation. The wilderness had given him more than solitude. It had given him a bond with something wild and free. And in that bond, he had found his own freedom. On clear nights, he would step outside and listen. Sometimes, he thought he heard a distant howl carried on the wind. Sometimes, he thought he saw a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting against the trees, just beyond the reach of his lantern light. Whether it was real or simply his heart longing, he couldn't say, but it was enough, because he knew he was no longer truly alone, and in the eyes of the forest, he had been seen.